In this video, we're going to learn how to do polynomial long division to divide polynomials. So what we're going to do is we are going to look at this example on the left where we're dividing just regular two-digit numbers, and that's going to lend us some insight as to how to divide the actual polynomials over here on the right. This is something we should already know how to do, and it's going to tell us how to kind of extend that idea into this example over here on the right. So whenever I look over here, if you remember, if I'm seeing 277 divided by 12, we first want to see how many times 12 divides into 27. In other words, 12 times what gives you 27 without going over it. And hopefully you're saying that's going to be 2, okay? Because 2 times 12 is 24. And then I subtract straight down and I get a 3, and then I bring down my 7. This is just the standard division algorithm. And I say, okay, well 12 times what gives me 37 without going over? And hopefully you're saying 3. And then when I multiply back through, 3 times 12 is 36. And then when I subtract, I get a 1. And so you could write that as 23 and 1 over 12, since 12 is what we were dividing by. Or you might see that shown as 23 remainder 1. Now I want to kind of be aware of both of those representations of our answer, because we might see both of those with our polynomials over here. So now we're going to do this example just like we did the problem over there on the left. And so I've kind of set up our division, and now I'm saying, okay, what's 8x cubed divided by 4x? In other words, 4x times what gives me 8x cubed? And hopefully you're saying, well, 4 times 2 is 8, and x squared times x is x cubed. So then whenever I multiply that back through, I have 4 times 2 is 8, and x times x squared is x cubed. And then we're going to subtract straight down. Well, those are going to cancel, and then I'm going to bring down my negative 4x squared, and we're just going to play the same game again. So 4 times what gives me negative 4, and that's negative 1, and x times what gives me x squared, and that's x. So now I'm going to take this negative 1x and multiply it back through. Negative 1 times 4 is negative 4. X times x is x squared, but we are going to subtract this. And when you subtract a negative, it's really like you're adding. So negative 4x squared plus 4x squared adds to 0, and now we're going to bring down our 32x, and we're almost there. 4x times what gives me 32x? Well, that's just going to be an 8. And then whenever I multiply that back through, 8 times 4x gives me 32x. You can see that in this situation we have no remainder. Sometimes we will have a remainder, but this time we won't. So our answer, our quotient in this situation, is the trinomial that I've boxed in up here. If you ever weren't sure if you were right, you just take this 4x, multiply it by this trinomial, and see if you get this is your answer. Let's try a few more. All right, the example on this slide is going to be a little different, because notice here we're not dividing by a monomial. In that last example, we just divided by 4x. Now we're going to divide by a binomial, by 2 terms here. And let's see how that changes our process. So I'm going to start off by looking only at the term on the left here, and I'm going to pretend like that's all we have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, how many times does 2r go into 4r cubed? In other words, 2r times what gives me 4r cubed? And that is going to be 2 times 2 is 4, and r squared times r gives me r cubed. And now I'm going to multiply that back through. So 2r squared times 2r is 4r cubed, but where this changes our process is I'm also going to multiply it back through times this second term right here. 2r squared times negative 1 is going to be negative 2r squared. And now when I subtract straight down, I'm going to subtract this entire value. Okay? 4r cubed minus r cubed, well, that just cancels or subtracts to 0. And then if I have a negative 8r squared, but I'm subtracting a negative 2r squared, it's like I'm adding 2r squared. So negative 8 of something plus 2 would give us negative 6r squared. And then we're going to bring down our 5r. Let's repeat the process. 2r times what gives me negative 6r squared? Well, 2 times negative 3 is 6, and r times r is r squared. So we're going to take this and multiply it back through times both of these values. Negative 3 times 2, that's going to be negative 6. R times r is r squared. But then don't forget to multiply the negative 3r times the negative 1. Negative 3 times negative 1 is positive 3, and then you just have the r. So I subtract negative 6r squared minus a negative. Remember, this means addition. Subtracting a negative means addition. That's just going to become a 0. And then 5 minus 3 means we have 2 r's. I'm going to bring down our constant term, which is a 6. And we're almost there. You're saying 2r divided by 2r is 1. And then I'm going to multiply back through. 1 times 2r is 2r. 1 times negative 1 is negative 1. 2r minus 2r is 0. 6 minus a negative 1 is 6 plus 1. And this 7, since its degree is less than the degree of what we're dividing for, this is considered a 0th degree term. This is considered a 1st degree term. We're going to be done at that point. So this one actually does have a remainder. It has a remainder of 7. Or you could write it, just like in our very first example, as 7 over this. Okay, last example. Nothing too crazy here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this first term and see how many times it goes into this term. In other words, 10w cubed divided by 5w. What do you get? And 10 divided by 5 is 2. W cubed divided by w is w squared. So then whenever I multiply back through, I'm going to get 10w cubed. And don't forget to also multiply the 2w times this term, but that's going to be 6w squared. And then I'm subtracting. That's just a 0. 11 of something, take away 6 of something, gives you 5 of that something. And then I'm going to bring down minus 2w. And now, how many times does 5w go into 5w squared? Or in other words, 5w times what gives you 5w squared? And that's just w, or 1w you could say. And I'm going to multiply this w, I'm going to multiply it back through times both of these terms. And whenever I do that, I should get 5w squared plus 3w. And we're going to subtract straight down. Negative 2 minus 3 is negative 5w. And then I'm going to bring down my 3. And we are almost there. What is negative 5w divided by 5w? That is negative 1. And negative 1 times 5w, when I multiply it back through, gives me negative 5w. And then I have a negative 3. Got to be real careful with your signs here because I am subtracting this. So whenever we subtract a negative, it means we're adding. So negative 5w plus 5w cancels. And then 3 minus a negative 3 means it's really 3 plus 3, which gives us a 6. So this example, I think the last one we wrote as a remainder, so this time I'll try it as a fraction. So I could say remainder 6, but instead I'm going to say it as 6 over 5w plus 3. And this up here, this entire thing would be your answer.